The fog clung to Willow Creek Lane like a shroud, muffling the world in an eerie, hushed grey. Eleanor Vance, her denim jacket a familiar shield against the crisp Massachusetts air, tightened her grip on Lily's small hand. Beside her, Lily, a sprite of 6 years, clutched her worn teddy bear, its button eyes seeming to peer into the milky expanse ahead. The path to their new home, a serpentine trail of moss-covered flagstones, vanished into the mist, leading toward a silhouette that was more a spectre than a dwelling. It was then, as the ancient oaks dripped moisture onto their heads and the silence pressed in, that a sound faint as a sigh seemed to drift on the invisible currents of air. It was a soft, sorrowful whimpering, high-pitched and fragile, a sound so profoundly melancholic it seemed to emanate not from the physical world, but from the very fabric of the old house itself, calling out into the swirling dampness. Eleanor paused, her heart skipping a beat, a cold tendril of unease coiling in her stomach. Lily, sensing her mother's sudden stillness, looked up, her wide, innocent eyes reflecting the murky light. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "Who's crying upstairs?" Eleanor swallowed, her rational mind already formulating excuses for the haunting sound. The wind, certainly, or perhaps a stray animal, not a child. Never a child. "Just the wind, sweetie," she murmured, pulling Lily closer, her voice trying to conjure a conviction she didn't quite feel. "This old house makes all sorts of noises. It's just talking to us." Lily, however, didn't seem entirely convinced, her gaze lingering on the ominous outline of the house before them, its 300-year-old bones cloaked in a velvet blanket of emerald moss and creeping ivy. Its gables sagged, its paint peeled in ancient strips, revealing layers of forgotten colors, and several windows stared out like vacant eyes. It was a steal, as she'd told her mother over the phone, a testament to its age and the formidable task it represented. A fixer-upper, yes, but more than that, it was a lifeline. Their lifeline. Just 6 weeks prior, their world had been a brightly lit apartment in Boston, a graphic design firm struggling to stay afloat, and the suffocating weight of rent payments that seemed to grow heavier with each passing month. When the company downsized, Eleanor found herself adrift, the vibrant city she loved suddenly a hostile, unforgiving place. The old colonial farmhouse on Willow Creek Lane in Sterling, Massachusetts, had appeared on a forgotten online listing, a forgotten relic at a price that whispered of desperation rather than charm. It was a leap of faith, a desperate scramble for a fresh start, far from the critical glances and silent judgments that had become her constant companions. Here, in the quiet embrace of the Massachusetts countryside, Eleanor hoped they could finally breathe. Stepping onto the stone path, each irregular flagstone seemed to whisper tales of countless footsteps, of lives lived and forgotten. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal aroma that filled Eleanor's lungs with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, unbidden sense of belonging. The front door, a heavy oak slab groaning on its ancient hinges, opened to reveal an interior draped in shadow and a palpable stillness. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight, filtering through grimy panes, illuminating a grand yet utterly desolate entryway. A single battered suitcase sat by Eleanor's feet, a stark symbol of their meager possessions and their uncertain future. The first few nights in the Willow Creek farmhouse were a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The house groaned with every shift in temperature, the ancient pipes sang their metallic songs, and the floorboards above creaked like a ship's timbers in a storm. Eleanor, exhausted from unpacking boxes and grappling with the overwhelming scale of their new home, dismissed each sound with a weary shrug. Lily, however, was a child of keen perception, a trait Eleanor usually cherished but now found herself wishing away. On their third night, as a restless moon cast fractured shadows through the bedroom window, Lily's small voice pierced the darkness. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice a tiny tremor in the vast silence of their new room. "The little girl is crying again. Upstairs." Eleanor, half asleep, patted Lily's head. "It's just the old house, sweetie," she mumbled, pulling the blanket higher around her daughter's chin. "The wind makes funny sounds sometimes." But Lily was persistent. "No, Mommy, it's not the wind, it's crying. Soft and sad. Always from the same place." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, a thread of unease beginning to unravel in her mind. Lily was imaginative, yes, but not prone to outright fabrications. especially not about something so consistent. She spent a long moment stroking Lily's hair, listening to the silence, trying to convince herself that the house was indeed just talking to itself. Lily eventually drifted back to sleep, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically, but Eleanor lay awake for what felt like hours, a faint, melancholic echo seeming to vibrate in the very air around her. The pattern established itself with an unsettling regularity. Almost every night the soft, sorrowful whimpering would drift down from the upper floor. It was never loud, never frantic, just a consistent, heart-wrenching sound of quiet despair. Eleanor, a woman grounded in logic and practicality, found herself increasingly troubled. She began to wander the second floor during the day, opening dusty doors to empty bedrooms, each one colder and stiller than the last. She ran her hands along the peeling wallpaper, testing the loose floorboards, trying to find a rational explanation for the sound Lily described. But the second floor offered no hidden passages, no obvious drafts that could mimic a child's cries. The only section she had yet to truly explore was the vast, dark attic, a cavernous space she had deemed too dangerous and overwhelming to tackle just yet. Its entrance was a pull-down stair in the hallway ceiling, almost swallowed by years of accumulated grime and cobwebs. One particularly damp and foggy evening, mirroring the gloom of their arrival, Eleanor was hunched over her laptop, attempting to breathe life into a new graphic design project. The familiar hum of the computer was a meager comfort in the sprawling silence of the old house. Lily was asleep, or so Eleanor thought, when the sound returned, sharper this time, cutting through the background noise. It wasn't the house. It was something else, something deeply mournful. A faint, high-pitched wail echoed from above, distinct and unmistakable. A shiver traced its way down Eleanor's spine, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She held her breath, straining her ears, and heard it again, undeniably human in its sorrow. It wasn't just Lily's imagination. This was real. The next morning, the lingering chill of the previous night's discovery clung to Eleanor like the persistent fog outside. Lily, oblivious to her mother's internal turmoil, bounced into the kitchen, a crayon drawing clutched in her small hand. "Mommy!" she announced, her voice bright. "I drew my friend." Eleanor took the paper, her breath catching in her throat. The drawing depicted a stick-figure child, disproportionately large, tearful eyes peering from a small, square window. What sent a jolt through Eleanor was the window itself. It was drawn high up in what looked uncannily like the neglected attic peak of their house. "She's always sad," Lily explained, her small finger pointing to the mournful figure. "She needs a friend." Eleanor's mind reeled. There was no window like that, not from the outside that she had observed, nor from any room she had opened on the main floors. The attic, the vast, unexplored attic, was the only place such a window could exist. The casual, innocent comment from her daughter ignited a spark of profound, unsettling curiosity within Eleanor, overriding her rational defenses. Her graphic design work, usually her anchor, her sole focus, now seemed less urgent, less compelling than the unspoken mystery of the house. A mother's instinct to protect her child from imagined fears, coupled with her own growing disquiet, pushed her towards investigation. She had to understand, not just for Lily's peace of mind, but for her own. The old house, which had once represented a clean slate, now seemed to hold its breath, guarding a secret. Determined to find answers beyond the creaks and groans, Eleanor drove into the heart of Stirling, a quaint, historic New England town. The Stirling Historical Society was a small, unassuming building. Its clapboard facade, painted a muted grey, nestled between a bustling bakery and a quiet antique shop. The scent of old paper and forgotten lives hung heavy in the air, a nostalgic aroma that tugged at Eleanor's heart. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly librarian, a woman with spectacles perched on the end of her nose, and a lifetime of local law etched into her kindly, wrinkled face, greeted Eleanor with a warm, if slightly formal, smile. Her white hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her tweed jacket suggested a woman who valued tradition and order. "Good afternoon, dear," Mrs. Jenkins chirped, her voice soft as rustling pages. "What brings you to our humble archives today?" Eleanor explained her recent move, her voice betraying a hint of the lingering exhaustion she felt. "We just moved into the old colonial farmhouse on Willow Creek Lane," she said, trying to sound casual, though her heart pounded a little faster. A flicker of hesitation crossed Mrs. Jenkins' eyes, a subtle tightening of her lips that Eleanor, attuned to subtle cues from her years in graphic design, immediately noticed. The librarian's gaze drifted momentarily to a framed sepia photograph on her desk, depicting a stern-faced family in stiff Victorian attire. "Ah, the old Lockwood place," Mrs. Jenkins said, her tone suddenly distant. She spoke vaguely of the Lockwood family, who had owned the property for generations, mentioning a tragedy long past, but quickly, almost too quickly, changed the subject to less sensitive local events, like the town's upcoming bicentennial celebration. The shift was palpable, a thinly veiled attempt to steer Eleanor away from a forbidden topic. Eleanor, however, was not easily deterred. The subtle evasiveness of Mrs. Jenkins only fueled her resolve. She spent the rest of the afternoon poring over dusty town records, old property deeds and faded census forms. Each document was a window into a past that felt increasingly connected to her present. She pieced together fragmented mentions of a Lockwood daughter named Abigail, who had lived in the late 1800s. Abigail, the record suggested, had been a beautiful young woman, prominent in local society, but her name seemed to disappear from public records abruptly, after what was vaguely referred to as a brief society-shattering scandal. A small, almost illegible newspaper clipping, tucked away in a brittle-bound volume of the Sterling Gazette, hinted at a mysterious death or disappearance, swiftly hushed up by the prominent Lockwood name. The article was short, vague, and buried deep on an inside page as if actively suppressed. Eleanor found herself tracing the elegant, looping letters of Abigail's name with her fingertip, a strange sense of empathy stirring within her. Who was Abigail? What was the scandal? And why was her story so deliberately obscured? Meanwhile, back at the farmhouse, the crying continued. A soft, persistent threnody that Eleanor now clearly heard herself. It wasn't just in her imagination, nor was it merely the wind. It was real, a sorrowful lament from within the very walls of the house. Lily, her child's innocent mind, weaving narratives to explain the inexplicable, began to speak of her invisible friend, whom she now called Ilara. "She likes my doll, Mommy," Lily announced one day, holding up her favorite, well-loved rag doll, "but she's still crying." Eleanor watched, a knot forming in her stomach, as Lily would often sit in the living room, whispering to the air, as if a presence unseen to Eleanor was right there beside her. Lily's descriptions were unnervingly specific, always placing Ilara upstairs, always sad, always near the secret window. The source of the crying, which Eleanor could now often hear emanating from a specific, boarded-up section of the attic, behind a wall in what appeared to be a disused storage space, became a singular obsession. The vague clues from the historical society, Lily's uncanny drawing and the undeniable sound itself, all converged on that one forgotten space. The house, which had once felt like a haven from the outside world, now felt like a living entity, whispering secrets of generations past. Eleanor knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the answer to Lily's question, the truth behind the persistent, sorrowful whimpering, lay hidden behind those old wooden planks. She had to know. For Lily, for her own sanity, and for the silent, persistent plea echoing through the ancient halls. The weight of 300 years of untold stories pressed down on her, demanding to be heard. She imagined the dusty air, the forgotten objects, the profound silence that would greet her behind that wall. With a mix of trepidation and resolve, Eleanor knew she had to face whatever buried truth awaited her. The subtle tightening of Mrs. Jenkins's lips, the hurried change of subject, resonated in Eleanor's mind long after she left the Sterling Historical Society. It wasn't just a house, it was a vault, guarding secrets the town preferred to keep buried. That night, as the sorrowful whimpering from upstairs filtered down more distinct than ever, Eleanor knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. It echoed not just in the silence of the house, but in the growing unease within her own heart. Lily's innocent questions, her casual talk of Ilara and the sad little girl, had become less imaginative fancy and more chilling premonition. The drawn window, high and small in the attic peak of their very home, was an undeniable blueprint of something hidden. Eleanor spent a restless night, the rhythm of her own heartbeat amplifying the faint, persistent lament from above. By dawn, a fierce resolve had solidified within her. She was a mother, a protector. Whether it was a plumbing issue, a rogue animal, or something far more unsettling, she would uncover it. For Lily, who deserved to sleep peacefully, and for herself, who needed answers more than she needed sleep. The first step was practical: tools. Her nearest neighbor was an elderly man named Arthur Henderson, a widower who lived alone in a meticulously kept bungalow 2 houses down. Arthur, with his kind eyes and a perpetually worn flannel shirt, was a fixture in the neighborhood, often seen tending his roses or fixing a sputtering lawnmower. Eleanor had waved to him a few times, but hadn't properly introduced herself. Now, armed with a newfound determination, she walked down the stone path, the morning mist still clinging to the ancient trees. Arthur was in his garage, humming a tuneless melody as he sorted through a jumble of screws. The scent of sawdust and oil hung heavy in the air. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," Eleanor called out, trying to project a cheerfulness she didn't entirely feel. Arthur looked up, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Morning, young lady. Settling in all right at the old Lockwood place?" The name Lockwood felt like a whispered echo, catching Eleanor off guard. "We are, thank you," she replied, a tight smile on her face. "Though it's quite a project. Actually, that's why I'm here. I was hoping you might have some tools I could borrow. I need to get into the attic, and there's a section that seems to be boarded up." Arthur paused, his gaze thoughtful. He slowly straightened up, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Boarded up, you say?" He paused, his eyes suddenly sharp, meeting hers. Old Lockwood was a private man, kept to himself, and his family was, well, they had their ways. He cleared his throat, a subtle tension entering his demeanor. "What kind of tools you thinking?" Eleanor listed them: a claw hammer, a pry bar, a sturdy screwdriver. Arthur nodded, walking over to a pegboard covered in an impressive array of instruments. As he handed her a heavy-duty pry bar, its metal worn smooth by years of use, he offered a piece of unsolicited advice, his voice lower now. "Be careful up there, Miss Vance. Old houses, they hold their secrets tight, especially that one. Been in that family for generations until it just sat empty for so long." He offered no further explanation, just a solemn nod, his gaze holding a depth of unspoken knowledge that sent another shiver down Eleanor's spine. The resistance to her investigation wasn't just physical, it was historical, embedded in the very silence and knowing glances of the community. Back at the farmhouse, armed with Arthur's tools, Eleanor felt the weight of both metal and expectation. Lily was at a new daycare in town, giving Eleanor a rare window of solitude. She stood at the foot of the narrow, pull-down attic stairs, the wooden slats dark and grimy, leading into what felt like a black abyss. The crying hadn't started yet for the day, but its echo remained, a phantom whisper urging her onward. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the string, and the heavy stairs creaked down with a groan that seemed to resonate through the entire house. The attic was vast and cavernous, a skeletal space under the steep gables. Dust motes danced in the sparse light that filtered through the grimy windows, creating spectral beams that illuminated an archaeological dig of forgotten lives. Trunks covered in spiderwebs, piles of brittle newspapers and ghostly furniture draped in white sheets stood like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of age, dry wood, mildew, and something else, something faintly sweet and melancholic, like dried flowers. Eleanor navigated through the labyrinth of forgotten possessions, her footsteps echoing loudly on the bare floorboards. She traced the lines of the roof, searching for the anomaly Lily had drawn, and then she saw it. High up, at the very peak of one gable, a small square window, almost entirely obscured by layers of grime and cobwebs, was indeed present. It was tucked away, easily missed from the outside, and certainly invisible from the lower floors. Below it, in what appeared to be a disused storage space against the farthest wall, was a section of wall distinct from the rest. Instead of the rough, unfinished studs and exposed beams of the attic, this part was covered in what looked like older, darker wooden boards, nailed haphazardly in place, almost as if meant to conceal something rather than simply build a wall. The wood was darker, older, some of it splitting, but clearly an intentional barrier. This was it, the place from where the crying emanated, the secret Lily had somehow intuited. Eleanor approached the boarded-up section, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The air around this particular spot felt colder, heavier, charged with an invisible energy. She ran her gloved hand over the rough wood, feeling the grain, the ancient nails embedded deep within. It looked like a permanent fixture, not just a temporary covering. This wasn't just a closet. It was a deliberate concealment, a sense of profound injustice, an echo of the tragedy long past Mrs. Jenkins had alluded to, began to seep into her bones. She began her assault with the claw hammer. The nails were old, rusted, and stubbornly embedded. Each strike of the hammer sent a jolt up her arm, reverberating through the silent attic, seemingly swallowed by the vast emptiness. The wood groaned in protest, splintering at the edges, but the main planks remained firm, resisting her efforts as if guarding their secret with a stubborn, ancient will. Sweat trickled down her temples, mixing with the dust that coated her face. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed through the fatigue, driven by an almost primal need to know. After 15 arduous minutes, one of the smaller, thinner planks finally loosened. With a triumphant grunt, Eleanor switched to the pry bar, wedging its flattened end beneath the defiant wood. She leaned into it, using every ounce of her body weight. The wood shrieked, a high-pitched, almost human sound, as the ancient nails slowly, painfully began to withdraw. The smell of old, disturbed wood, a dry, woody scent mixed with something metallic from the rusted nails, filled the air. She pulled again, gritting her teeth, her arms trembling with effort. With a loud, resonant crack, the first board gave way, tearing free from the wall, sending a plume of dust into the still air. A sliver of darkness, even deeper than the attic's shadows, was revealed. Eleanor paused, catching her breath, her chest heaving. Through the narrow gap, a rush of stale, stagnant air wafted out, smelling of forgotten time and confinement. She could see nothing yet, only the profound blackness beyond. A mixture of fear and exhilaration coursed through her veins. This was it. The barrier was broken. She worked methodically, prying at the next board, then the next, using the hammer to loosen and the pry bar to wrench free. Each victory, each loud thwack of wood tearing free, brought her closer to the truth. She envisioned Lily's drawing, the sad little girl behind the small window, and the thought spurred her onward. This wasn't just a renovation project. It was an excavation of history, a liberation of a forgotten narrative. It took her over 2 hours. 2 hours of relentless physical labor, her hands aching, her back protesting, her denim shirt plastered to her skin with sweat. Finally, with a loud, final creak that seemed to echo with both defiance and surrender, a large section of the boarded wall collapsed inward, creating an opening large enough for her to step through. Beyond the removed planks lay a small, hidden room. It was not much bigger than a walk-in closet, yet it was undeniably a room, fully enclosed, with walls that had once been plastered and painted a faded, sickly yellow. A single high window, exactly as Lily had drawn, was set into the gable, allowing a single, weak beam of sunlight to filter through. This beam illuminated a vortex of dancing dust motes, making the air seem alive. The room was tiny, almost like a nursery, yet the pervasive atmosphere was one of profound abandonment. A child's worn ragdoll, its calico face faded and its button eyes staring blankly, lay on the dusty floor in the center of the room. Beside it, a tiny, faded baby blanket, folded with an almost ritualistic care, was half buried under a thin layer of undisturbed dust. Eleanor stood at the threshold, her tools clattering to the floor, her breath caught in her throat. The physical exertion had vanished, replaced by a cold wave of realization. This wasn't just a secret storage space. This was a place of profound sorrow, a chamber of isolation. The air, though stale, held a distinct chill, an emotional residue of immense, enduring grief. The crying, she now understood, was not merely an echo in the old pipes or the whisper of the wind. It was the ghostly lament of this very room, an imprint of suffering that had lingered for generations. Her gaze fixed on the small, high window, the one Lily had drawn. It offered a pathetic view of the towering oak trees, a meager glimpse of the outside world, a cruel tease of freedom. And then her eyes caught something else, glinting faintly in the solitary shaft of sunlight. Tucked away in a dark corner, almost hidden beneath a loose floorboard, lay a small rusted metal box. Its surface was corroded, but its outline was unmistakable. It looked like a time capsule, patiently waiting to be discovered, holding its silent vigil for perhaps 100 years or more. Eleanor's hands trembled as she extended them into the dust-laden air, reaching for the box. Every instinct screamed at her, a profound sense of intrusion mixing with an overwhelming compulsion to know. This was it, the truth, the secret the house had guarded so fiercely. the reason for the crying upstairs. It lay heavy and cold in the small rusted box, promising to unravel not just the mystery of the house, but perhaps something far more personal and devastating. The rusted metal box was cold and heavy in Eleanor's trembling hands, a vessel of forgotten sorrows. Dust, thick and ancient, coated its surface, clinging to her fingers like fine ash. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the profound silence of the tiny, hidden room. The single beam of sunlight, filtering through Lily's drawn window, seemed to illuminate not just the dancing motes of dust, but the very weight of history that pressed down on Eleanor. The worn rag doll, the faded baby blanket, they spoke of a life, a child, held captive by a cruel secret. The crying, which had been a phantom whisper, now felt like a palpable presence in the air, a melancholic hum that resonated deep within her bones. Eleanor sat carefully on the dusty floorboards, the brittle wood groaning softly under her weight. She placed the metal box in her lap, her fingers tracing the faint, almost indiscernible patterns of rust. There was no lock, only a stiff, corroded clasp that resisted her efforts for a moment before yielding with a faint, metallic groan. The sound echoed in the small room, like a gasp of release. She lifted the lid, slowly, bracing herself for what she might find. Inside, nestled amongst layers of brittle, yellowed silk, were three objects. The first was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings spread as if in mid-flight, its smooth surface worn by countless touches. It was a beautiful piece, a miniature work of art, conveying a sense of delicate hope and freedom. The second was a tiny, dried rose, its petals shriveled and brown, yet still retaining the ghost of its former fragrance, a faint, sweet whisper of memory. And the third, lying beneath the other two, was a small leather-bound diary, its cover faded and creased, its pages thick with age. It looked fragile, as if it might crumble to dust in her hands. Eleanor picked up the diary, her fingers brushing over the soft, worn leather. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of lavender and old paper emanated from it. She opened it to the first page, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The script was elegant, flowing, the ink faded but still legible, the graceful hand of Abigail Lockwood. The first entries were mundane, observations of daily life in the grand Lockwood house in the late 1800s, descriptions of garden parties, social calls, the oppressive expectations placed upon a young woman of her station. But as Eleanor turned the brittle pages, the tone shifted, growing more intimate, more desperate. Abigail wrote of a forbidden love, a passionate clandestine affair with a stable hand named Thomas. Their meetings were stolen moments in the moonlit stables, whispered promises beneath the rustling leaves of the ancient oak trees. The entries were filled with a young woman's burgeoning joy, a reckless defiance of societal norms, a desperate yearning for a life beyond the gilded cage of her family's expectations. Eleanor felt a pang of empathy, understanding the suffocating pressure Abigail must have felt, the rigid social constructs of her era. Then came the entry that stole Eleanor's breath. I am with child, Thomas's child. My heart is a tempest of fear and joy. What will become of us? What will become of our precious babe? The Lockwoods will never accept this. They will destroy us. The words, though penned over a century ago, resonated with a raw, visceral emotion that transcended time. Eleanor felt a cold dread begin to coil in her stomach. This was the scandal, the reason for the abrupt disappearance from the historical records. A single, unwed mother in that era was a social pariah, a stain on a prominent family's name. The diary continued, chronicling Abigail's agonizing secret pregnancy, her desperate attempts to conceal her growing belly, the fear that clawed at her soul with every passing day. She wrote of Thomas's unwavering love and their naive, impossible dreams of running away, of building a life together, far from the judgmental eyes of Sterling. But the Lockwoods, Eleanor knew, were a powerful, unforgiving force. Then came the entry, dated late autumn of 1888, that shattered Eleanor's composure. She is here, my beautiful, precious girl, born in the dead of night, with only the old housekeeper to help me. They took her, my family. They ripped her from my arms, her cries still echoing in my ears. They say she is dead, born too weak, but I saw her. I touched her. She was perfect. A tiny bird, my little Ilara, snatched away. They say she is buried in the family plot, but I know they lie. I feel her alive. I feel her tears. Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Ilara. The name Lily had spoken, the name of the invisible friend, the very name that had resonated in the cries from upstairs. The baby blanket, the rag doll, the tiny room, it all clicked into place with devastating clarity. Abigail's powerful family, fearing social ruin, had ruthlessly orchestrated a cover-up. They took Ilara from Abigail, confining the infant in this very attic room, away from prying eyes, away from the prying world, telling Abigail her baby had died at birth. Ilara was the crying upstairs, her desperate pleas echoing through the house, unheard by her grief-stricken mother. Eleanor's eyes blurred with unshed tears as she devoured the subsequent entries. Abigail's diary chronicled her slow, agonizing descent into despair, her spirit broken by the loss and deception. She wrote of her forbidden, furtive visits to the attic room, sneaking in the dead of night armed with a hidden key. She wrote of seeing her baby, of trying to comfort her through the boarded walls, of pressing her ear against the wood, listening to the soft, sorrowful whimpering. I sing to her through the cracks in the wall. I tell her stories of birds that fly free. My heart breaks anew each time I leave her. My sweet Ilara, my little bird, trapped. Eleanor realized the wooden bird carved from earlier was not just a beautiful trinket, but a poignant, heartbreaking symbol of a mother's desperate wish for her child's freedom. It was a tangible piece of Abigail's enduring hope against crushing despair. Abigail's entries described her desperate attempts to reach her child, to convince her family to let her hold Ilara, to acknowledge her existence. But the Lockwoods were unyielding, their social standing paramount. The diary entries grew more disjointed, more despairing. Abigail's health deteriorated, her spirit slowly dying, consumed by grief and the unbearable burden of her secret. The last entries were barely legible, a fragmented plea for forgiveness, a lament for her lost child. They have taken her away, far away, to an orphanage, they say, changed her name, severed every tie. My Ilara, gone. I am hollow, broken. May God forgive them for what they have done to my little bird. Abigail, broken by the loss and deception, wasted away soon after. She died believing her daughter had been taken to an orphanage in a distant town, never knowing what truly became of her. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, identical to the one in the box, tucked within the diary's final pages, fell into Eleanor's lap as she turned to the very last entry. Eleanor recognized it immediately. She had found a similar, though slightly larger, carving on the mantelpiece in the living room just a week earlier, dismissing it as a decorative trinket. Now, she understood its profound significance. It was a mother's enduring symbol, passed down hidden in plain sight, a silent lament of a stolen legacy. Eleanor sat frozen, the diary open in her lap, the weight of generations of untold grief pressing down on her. Her mind raced, making connections, pulling at threads of her own past she had never fully understood. The records of the orphanage that had taken Ilara, the changed name, the vague, fragmented family tree Eleanor had always struggled to trace on her father's side. The unusual middle name shared by her own grandmother, a name her father had always claimed was a family eccentricity, a name Eleanor had herself considered giving to Lily. Ilara. The devastating truth hit Eleanor like a physical blow, a sudden, brutal impact that stole her breath. Ilara was not just a historical figure, a tragic victim of a bygone era. Ilara Lockwood, the baby hidden and silenced in this very room, the child whose cries had echoed for generations, was Eleanor's great-great-grandmother. Given up in secret, her lineage erased, her memory buried. Eleanor herself was a direct descendant of the very child confined and silenced in this house, a product of generations shaped by a forgotten injustice. The quiet resilience of her own mother, the struggles and perseverance of her ancestors, the inexplicable pull she had felt towards this particular dilapidated house, it all suddenly took on a profound, almost fated, significance. She was not just a random single mother seeking a fresh start. She was part of this history, a living testament to a buried truth. The buried family truth was intertwined with her very identity. As Eleanor finished reading the last entry, a profound silence descended upon the house. The faint, sorrowful crying that had haunted its halls, that had drawn Lily's innocent questions, finally ceased. It was as if the long-imprisoned spirit of Ilara, of Abigail, had found peace, Their story finally told, finally heard. A deep sense of peace, cold yet comforting, filled the air in the tiny, hidden room. It was not the oppressive silence of abandonment, but the quiet stillness of release, of wounds finally beginning to heal. Then, from downstairs, Lily's voice, clear and bright, pierced the silence, carrying upwards through the ancient floorboards, untouched by the shadows of history that had just been lifted. "Mommy," she called out, her voice filled with a child's simple joy. "She's not sad anymore." Eleanor closed the diary, cradling it gently against her chest. The heavy weight of generations of untold grief, the echo of a forgotten life, had lifted. She looked around the small, silent room, no longer seeing a place of sorrow, but a testament to enduring love, a mother's desperate hope, and a child's lost, but now found, legacy. Her own struggles, her feelings of being adrift and alone, suddenly felt connected to a larger narrative, a tapestry of resilience woven through generations. The house, which had called to her in its desperate sorrow, was now offering her something far more profound, belonging, and a purpose she had never anticipated. She was not just a new resident, she was a guardian, a storyteller tasked with reclaiming a lost heritage. The words of Abigail Lockwood's diary, imbued with generations of sorrow and defiant love, still resonated within Eleanor as she descended the creaking attic stairs. Each step felt lighter, yet carried the profound weight of a newly discovered truth. The silence in the house was no longer menacing. It was expectant, a canvas waiting for a new story to be painted upon it. Lily's cheerful voice, declaring that her invisible friend was not sad anymore, echoed a sentiment that Eleanor felt deep in her soul. The pervasive chill in the hidden room had given way to a quiet warmth, as if the very air itself had released a long-held breath. The house, which had once felt like a repository of burdens, now felt like a sacred trust. Eleanor walked into the living room, her mind still reeling from the revelations. Lily was engrossed in a drawing on the rug, her crayons scattered around her like colorful confetti. "Mommy, look!" Lily exclaimed, holding up a new picture. It was a brightly colored drawing of two stick figures, one small and one larger, holding hands, skipping through a field of flowers. Above them, a tiny bird soared freely in a sky of brilliant blue. "Ilara and me," Lily declared, her smile radiating pure joy. "She's happy now. She told me." A shiver of awe, not fear, traced Eleanor's spine. How had Lily known? A child's innocent perception, perhaps, attuned to truths adults often miss. Eleanor sank onto the old sofa, the leather-bound diary still clutched in her hand. She watched Lily, a direct descendant of Ilara, playing contentedly, unknowingly embodying the culmination of Abigail's desperate hope. The gravity of her discovery wasn't just historical, it was deeply personal. Her own struggles, the feeling of being an outsider, a single mother battling against an unforgiving world, suddenly had a powerful lineage. The resilience she had always admired in her own mother and grandmother, the quiet strength that had carried them through countless challenges, now had a name: Ilara, Abigail. They were not just names in a diary. They were her blood, her history, the very roots of who she was. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of focused, purposeful action. Eleanor, with Lily's enthusiastic, if uncomprehending help, began to meticulously restore the hidden room. It was no longer a place of confinement, but a sanctuary, a memorial, a testament to a love that had defied generations of silence. She cleaned away the dust of centuries, the accumulated grime that clung to every surface. With careful hands, she scraped away the peeling wallpaper, revealing the original plaster beneath, which she then painstakingly repaired and painted a soft, hopeful cream. She researched furniture and decor from the late 1800s, seeking pieces that would honor the era in which Abigail and Ilara had lived. She found a small antique rocking chair at a local flea market, its wood worn smooth by years of use, and a delicate lace curtain that she hung on the small high window. The tiny window, once a symbol of cruel imprisonment, now let in a soft, diffused light, bathing the room in a gentle glow. She placed Lily's rag doll beside Ilara's own worn toy, a silent bridge between generations, a comforting companionship for the long-lost child. The wooden bird, the one from Abigail's diary, found its place of honor on a small, newly polished shelf, its wings forever spread in silent flight. The restoration was a form of therapy for Eleanor, a way to channel her grief, her anger at the injustice, and her overwhelming gratitude for the truth. Each brushstroke, each polished surface, felt like an act of healing, a quiet reparation for the wrongs of the past. It was a physical manifestation of her commitment to reclaim her family's lost heritage, to give voice to those who had been silenced. But the physical restoration was just the beginning. The more profound task was the meticulous documentation of her family history. Eleanor, armed with Abigail's diary, returned to the Sterling Historical Society. This time her approach was different. She wasn't just a curious new resident, she was a woman on a mission, her eyes alight with a fierce determination. Mrs. Jenkins, who greeted her with a reserved smile, immediately sensed the change. "Back so soon, dear?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, her spectacles still perched on her nose. Eleanor nodded, placing the leather-bound diary gently on the polished oak table, its presence a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the archives. "Mrs. Jenkins," Eleanor began, her voice steady, "I found this in my house. It belonged to Abigail Lockwood." Mrs. Jenkins gasped, a soft, almost inaudible sound. Her eyes widened, scanning the diary's faded cover, a mixture of shock and recognition washing over her face. "Impossible," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the worn leather. "The family always maintained. They said it was burned," Eleanor explained, her voice calm and measured. The story of the hidden room, of Ilara, of the profound injustice suffered by Abigail. She recounted the contents of the diary, the forced separation, the lies, the erasure of a child's existence. As Eleanor spoke, Mrs. Jenkins listened, her face a canvas of disbelief, then dawning understanding, and finally, profound sadness. "The Lockwoods were a powerful family," Mrs. Jenkins finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "They controlled everything, even the narrative. It was always whispered in hushed tones that something terrible happened, but no one dared to speak of it openly. The shame, the disgrace, it would have ruined them." Mrs. Jenkins then confessed that her own great-aunt had been the housekeeper for the Lockwoods, an old woman who had always been secretive and sad, hinting at dark doings, but never revealing the full truth. The shame and guilt of complicity had been passed down, unspoken, through generations. With the diary as her guide, Eleanor delved deeper into the records, aided now by a Mrs. Jenkins who was eager to help, to right a historical wrong. They found records of Ilara's baptism, secretly performed by a sympathetic local minister, carefully hidden in the church archives. They traced her journey to an orphanage in a distant town, confirmed her new, changed name, and with painstaking effort began to follow the faint trail of her life. It was a challenging, often frustrating process. Names were altered, records were deliberately obscured, and leads often led to dead ends. But Eleanor's determination was unwavering. She was not just seeking information, she was reclaiming a lineage, piecing together the fractured narrative of her own family. The connection to her own grandmother was the breakthrough, a tiny, almost illegible notation in an orphanage ledger, an old photograph of a young girl with an unmistakable resemblance to Eleanor's grandmother, a unique birthmark described in Abigail's diary that matched one Eleanor had seen on an old family portrait. It was undeniable. Ilara Lockwood, the child of sorrow, had survived. She had grown up, had children, and her bloodline, unbroken, had eventually led to Eleanor Vance. Eleanor shared the story with Lily, simplifying the complex tragedy into a tale of a brave mommy bird who lost her little bird. But then the little bird flew far away and grew up and had her own little birds, and now we remember them all. Lily, with the boundless empathy of a child, understood the essence of the story. She would visit the newly restored room, bringing her dolls and whispering secrets to Ilara's worn rag doll, a bridge of innocence connecting past and present. The restored room, bathed in soft light, became a quiet place of contemplation for Eleanor, a reminder of the strength and resilience woven into her family's very being. The old colonial farmhouse on Willow Creek Lane, once a symbol of Eleanor's struggles, a fixer-upper that whispered of financial strain and unsettling mysteries, transformed. It became a beacon of healing, a living museum of memory, and a testament to enduring love. No longer just a house, it was a home infused with purpose, a place where a hidden past had found its voice, and a new future, rooted in truth and belonging, could finally take hold. Eleanor and Lily, no longer just new residents, became the living guardians of a rediscovered legacy, Eleanor began to weave her family's story into her graphic design work. She started a new project, a digital archive dedicated to reclaiming lost family histories, drawing inspiration from Abigail's elegant script and the poignant symbolism of the wooden bird. Her designs were no longer just about aesthetics. They were about connection, about truth, about the power of untold stories. Her business, once barely treading water, began to thrive, attracting clients who were drawn to her unique vision and the deep authenticity that now infused her work. The artistic passion that had once been purely for survival now burned with a fiercer, more meaningful flame. The community of Sterling, initially reserved, slowly opened its doors to Eleanor. Mrs. Jenkins, now a steadfast ally, became a frequent visitor, sharing old stories, helping Eleanor connect with distant relatives of the Lockwoods who had fragments of family lore they had never dared to speak aloud. The whispers surrounding the old Lockwood place shifted from uneasy mystery to profound respect, a recognition of the tragic beauty of a hidden past brought to light. Eleanor's journey had inadvertently become an act of collective healing for the town, an unburdening of a century-old secret. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned to fiery hues of crimson and gold, Eleanor stood on the wide porch of the farmhouse, watching Lily chase fallen leaves across the lawn. The house, its moss-covered roof now a vibrant emerald, its freshly painted trim crisp against the restored wood, stood proudly, no longer a ghost of its former grandeur, but a testament to resurrection. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the ancient trees in golden light, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. No whimpering, no sadness, only the cheerful sounds of Lily's laughter and the quiet hum of a home finally at peace. The wooden bird, a replica now carved by a local artisan, sat on the porch railing, its wings catching the last rays of sunlight, a silent sentinel of hope and freedom. Eleanor's journey had led her not just to a new home, but to a deeper understanding of herself, of the enduring power of family, and of the profound echoes that love and loss leave behind. The house, once a source of uncertainty, was now a foundation, solid and true. It was a place where generations of sorrow had been transmuted into a powerful legacy, a narrative of resilience that would continue to unfold, chapter by chapter, in the lives of Eleanor and Lily, the living guardians of a rediscovered truth. The air in Sterling, Massachusetts, had a crisp, invigorating scent now, a blend of pine needles and wood smoke as autumn deepened. The old colonial farmhouse on Willow Creek Lane, no longer a desolate fixer-upper, vibrated with a quiet, contented energy. Eleanor, watching Lily play in the vibrant tapestry of fallen leaves, felt a profound sense of peace. The haunting whimpers had vanished, replaced by the joyful echoes of a child's laughter and the contented creaks of a house finally at rest. But the peace was not one of forgetting. It was a peace forged from understanding, from the profound and sometimes devastating weight of truth. The story of Abigail and Ilara, once a buried secret, had begun to weave itself into the fabric of Eleanor's everyday life. It shaped her graphic design work, infusing her projects with a depth and emotional resonance that attracted new clients. Her business, now named Willow Creek Designs, found its niche in creating bespoke family history narratives, digital archives that brought forgotten ancestors to life. Eleanor found immense satisfaction in helping others connect with their past, in giving voice to those whose stories had been lost to time or deliberately silenced. She was no longer just a designer. She was a historical detective, a keeper of legacies. One chilly Saturday morning, as Eleanor brewed a pot of her favorite artisanal coffee, she contemplated her next steps. The restoration of the hidden room was complete, a quiet, sunlit sanctuary that now held a profound significance for her and Lily. The historical documentation, painstakingly compiled with Mrs. Jenkins's invaluable assistance, filled several binders, a tangible record of Ilara's journey from a hidden infant to a woman whose lineage now flourished. But Eleanor knew there was more to do. A truth so devastating, so deliberately obscured, demanded more than just a private acknowledgement. It demanded public recognition, a final definitive act of justice that would honor Abigail's memory and fully reclaim Ilara's place in history. Eleanor decided to organize a small, private gathering at the farmhouse, not a sensational exposé, but a quiet, dignified unveiling of the truth. She invited Mrs. Jenkins, of course, as well as Arthur Henderson, whose subtle hints had guided her, and a few other respected members of the Sterling Historical Society who had expressed genuine interest in the Lockwood family history. She also extended invitations to a handful of distant Lockwood relatives, whose curiosity had been piqued by the burgeoning whispers in town, fragments of a story they had only ever heard as vague, cautionary tales. The day of the gathering dawned clear and crisp, the sun a pale disk in a brilliant blue sky. Eleanor had prepared a simple spread of tea and homemade pastries, the aroma filling the old house with a welcoming warmth. The hidden room, now softly lit and adorned with wildflowers Lily had picked, stood as the focal point. On a small antique table, Eleanor carefully placed Abigail's diary, open to the page describing Ilara's birth. Beside it, the worn rag doll, Ilara's baby blanket, and the intricately carved wooden bird rested, silent witnesses to the unfolding narrative. As her guests arrived, a quiet buzz of anticipation filled the living room. Mrs. Jenkins, her eyes alight with a mixture of excitement and solemnity, greeted Eleanor with a warm embrace. Arthur Henderson, usually a man of few words, nodded sagely as he looked around the house, his gaze lingering on the now visible attic window. The distant Lockwood relatives, initially hesitant, soon found themselves drawn into the quiet magnetism of the old house. Eleanor began to speak, her voice calm and clear, recounting her journey from a desperate single mother seeking a new beginning to the unexpected discovery of a buried family truth. She spoke of Lily's innocent questions, the persistent crying upstairs, and her own relentless search for answers. Then, with a deep breath, she picked up Abigail's diary. She read aloud, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, excerpts from Abigail's heart-wrenching entries: the forbidden love, the secret pregnancy, the brutal separation, the despair, and the enduring, desperate love for her little bird, Ilara. As Eleanor read, the room fell into a profound silence. Gasps of disbelief and murmurs of sorrow rippled through the small assembly. The distant Lockwood relatives exchanged shocked glances, their faces pale as they realized the magnitude of the secret their ancestors had kept, the profound injustice they had inflicted. Mrs. Jenkins dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her shoulders shaking gently. Arthur Henderson sat with a grim expression, his gaze fixed on the open diary, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken truths he had carried for so long. Eleanor then meticulously laid out the evidence of Ilara's survival. The orphanage records, the changed names, the faint, almost erased connections that had eventually led to her own grandmother. She explained how Ilara Lockwood had grown up, married and had children, forging a new life, unknowingly carrying the hidden legacy of her mother's fierce love. She spoke of her grandmother's middle name, Ilara, an unusual family eccentricity that was now revealed as a direct, poignant link to a stolen identity. The room filled with the quiet murmur of shared understanding, a collective gasp of revelation. And so, Eleanor concluded, her voice gaining strength, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the room, I stand here today, a direct descendant of Ilara Lockwood. My daughter Lily is her great-great-great-granddaughter. The cries that haunted this house, that called to my daughter, were the echoes of a mother's broken heart, of a child's lost infancy. But today, those cries are replaced by peace. Today, Ilara Lockwood and her mother Abigail are finally seen. They are finally heard. Their story, once buried in shame, is now reclaimed in love. A ripple of emotion, raw and powerful, swept through the room. One of the older Lockwood relatives, a stoic woman named Beatrice, rose slowly, her eyes filled with tears. My great-grandfather. He was Abigail's brother, she said, her voice raspy with emotion. I always heard whispers of a family matter, a great sorrow, but never this, never such cruelty. We owe them, Abigail and Ilara, a profound apology, for the silence, for the shame. Other relatives nodded, their faces etched with a mixture of sorrow and relief, as if a long-held burden had finally been lifted. Eleanor then led her guests into the hidden room. The soft light, the quiet dignity of the space, the presence of the artifacts, Ilara's doll, the blanket, Abigail's diary, spoke volumes. It was a space consecrated by truth, a memorial that transcended mere physical dimensions. As they stood there, a profound sense of reverence filled the small room. It was a moment of collective witnessing, a communal act of healing. Lily, who had been listening from the periphery, now approached the door of the room, her small hand reaching out and gently touching Ilara's rag doll. "Hello, Ilara," she whispered, a soft smile on her face. "You're not sad anymore, are you?" The gathering, though small, had a profound impact. News of Eleanor's discovery and the dignified manner in which she shared it spread quietly through Stirling. The town, which had carried the unspoken weight of the Lockwood secret for generations, now embraced the truth. The Stirling Historical Society, spearheaded by Mrs. Jenkins, launched an initiative to document and honor the stories of other marginalized voices in their town's history, inspired by Eleanor's courage. The old Lockwood place, once an enigma, became a landmark, a symbol of redemption and the power of truth. Eleanor's Willow Creek designs flourished. Her work wasn't just about restoring family trees, it was about restoring identity, about healing generational wounds. She found herself collaborating with historians, genealogists, and even therapists, creating a unique service that merged design with deep personal narrative. Her success wasn't measured in profit alone, but in the countless lives she touched, helping others find their own buried truths. Lily thrived in their new home. The initial trepidation she had felt, the innocent questions about crying upstairs, had dissolved entirely. She explored the farmhouse with boundless energy, her laughter echoing through its halls, a testament to the joy that now filled its ancient spaces. The hidden room remained a special place for her, a quiet corner where she could connect with her ancestors, a tangible link to her family's resilience. She knew, with a child's simple wisdom, that their home was not just a house, it was a story, a testament to love's enduring power. Eleanor often sat on the porch swing in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the ancient oak trees, casting long, peaceful shadows across Willow Creek Lane. The wooden bird, a replica of Abigail's, still sat on the railing, its wings perpetually poised for flight. She thought of Abigail, a young woman whose love had defied an oppressive society, and of Ilara, whose spirit had found peace across generations. Their story, once a lament, was now a hymn of hope, a powerful reminder that love, in its purest form, can transcend even the darkest of secrets and the cruelest of injustices. The old colonial farmhouse on Willow Creek Lane, now lovingly restored, stood as a living testament to a rediscovered legacy. It was a place where a hidden past had finally found its voice, and a new future, deeply rooted in truth and belonging, had blossomed. Eleanor and Lily, no longer just new residents, but the living guardians of this profound inheritance, found strength and purpose in their shared history. Their journey was not just about finding a house, it was about finding themselves, connected to a story far grander and more enduring than they could ever have imagined. It was a narrative of courage, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of love over silence.